My name is John Connolly. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Humanities and chair of the Department of Linguistics and Languages. I was told I could give a brief rundown of our own research and its relationship to industry, but anybody that knows me well knows that I don't speak briefly. So I'm the Fidel Castro of public speaking. So at any rate, I will avoid doing that except to say that we study linguistics and language functions, and in my lab we study brain imaging correlates of it, and we have links with collaborators in the school system in regards to speech language impairments, dyslexia, etc. And in my lab in particular, I just collaborate with that work. In my lab in particular, we look at language function as and its problems associated with brain injury. So however acquired, so we just refer to it as acquired brain injury. We're now moving into coma research, and just last Friday we started the early stages of looking at what is now accurately referred to as mild traumatic brain injury, otherwise known as concussion. Concussion always sounded like something you would just walk off, as coaches used to tell me. So if you've ever had a concussion, pay attention. It's not trivial, it's a traumatic brain injury. At any rate, I'm very glad to have the opportunity to get this session going, because as the morning progressed, we were losing more and more panelists. So I thought I might be able to give you a talk about all of my research at the rate we were going. So at any rate, I'm very happy to introduce our first set of speakers, and we will keep to a fairly tight timeline. Now, the first set of speakers, we have lost Terry Flynn for family reasons, family health related reasons. Terry can't be with us. But happily with us, we have Brady Wood. And Brady was the Director of Strategy and Public Relations at St. Joseph's Health System here in Hamilton, and is currently Chief Communications Officer at the Niagara Health System. So Brady will be talking to us about his own work, but also in relation to his interactions with Terry Flynn. And also, just to orient you all, I hope you can see well, because the panelists will be staying and using the microphones here. The emphasis on this whole enterprise was that it should not be an academic conference-like setting, it should be more a conversation. So that's, I think, the way we're going, and I'm just going to sit quietly in the corner that President Dean mentioned. So thank you. Brady.
Should I come up, or do I stay?
You can stay there. You can come up if you want.
No, that would be easier.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you, folks. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm currently a healthcare executive with Niagara Health System, which is probably the largest geographical region, multi-site healthcare organization, certainly in Ontario. I'm also proud to be here because I'm a philosophy grad. So before I got involved in healthcare, I completed an undergrad and master's degree in philosophy. So I'm actually far more comfortable talking about Spinoza than some of the stuff we'll be talking about today. Niagara Health System was sort of a challenged organization. It was 7 different hospitals that were kind of merged through what I would call a shotgun wedding in about 2000. And I don't think that was ever really accepted by the 12 communities that Niagara Health System serves. So it's situated amongst a very diverse geographical region that includes Fort Erie, Port Colborne, Welland, Wainfleet, Pelham, St. Catharines, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Niagara Falls. So there are 11 city councils with 11 mayors, and there are also a regional council and 4 MPPs overseeing the region. And compared to, if you know healthcare in Hamilton, you don't really hear a lot of dust-ups that involve sort of municipal politicians, but in Niagara, everyone is heavily engaged in healthcare. So from about 2000 on, there was kind of unending controversy. So by 2002, the first board chair and CEO had resigned. So within 2 years, the leadership team had either called it quits or were asked to leave. I don't know the truth of that. Shortly thereafter, there were votes of non-confidence by the physicians. The nursing union censured the hospital because they didn't like the sort of employment practices at the time. And that sort of all led up to a plan that was to see some amalgamation of services in St. Catharines from the other communities. So all of these communities were seeing this as a loss. So there was a public protest, someone burned a hospital sign on the lawn of a hospital, a doctor got arrested for kicking a police car. And so from where I sat at St. Joe's, which is an organization that had a very calm and strong reputation, watching this for 10 years or so was very strange to see that kind of controversy. So how I got involved was around, I think it was May of 2011, Niagara Health System then had to declare a C. difficile outbreak. And what ended up starting to happen was not only were they being criticized for having an infectious disease outbreak, and I can talk about that bug, it's a complicated thing to communicate about in the best of times, they're also being criticized for the way they communicated about it. So some of the media were alluding to the fact that, well, maybe they've hidden some of these deaths, or why did this happen? Was it underfunding? Those kinds of questions started to arise. So my boss at St. Joe's, Dr. Kevin Smith, who's the president and CEO of St. Joe's Health System, asked me if I would go on a secondment to sort of help those folks out. And we joke about this now, but he said to me, Brady, I bet you could probably clean this up in a couple of months and we can all go about our day jobs. Well, I'm still there, and it's 2 years later this July. So what ended up happening was when I got there, I went in thinking I was helping with C. difficile communications, and what I immediately recognized was this was a very deep kind of relationship dysfunction with the community. And so I was very blessed to have some really great mentors when it came to communications. First and foremost being Terry Flynn. Dr. Flynn was previously at the business school, now in communications at McMaster. And really I think that deserves such an enormous deal of recognition for founding a program called the Masters of Communication Management program here at McMaster with Syracuse University. So the notion of the program is taking what I discovered is a very rich discipline of public relations research and putting that in the hands of business communicators. So it's sort of like a bit of an executive MBA with a heavy-duty kind of reputation management program. And the way I describe the difference, why the program is so great, is that I think folks coming out of communications undergrads or diploma programs are really great at writing releases, planning special events, kind of those, what some of us see as the core functions of public relations on the practical side. But when I kind of use this term a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but when I try to talk to people about what I do and what I learned through the program, I think of it as reputation game theory. You're really thinking through all the nuanced interactions the organization has with the public and figuring out what are the repercussions of what we're doing, or how do we enhance our relationship with a particular segment, and using a lot of empirical data. So back to the Niagara story, I recognized that even with the crisis communications best practices that I was aware of, this was no easy fix, and that we really kind of had to find a way of bursting the bubble. So I actually engaged Dr. Flynn as an external expert, resident at McMaster, great deal of credibility to help me analyze the situation. We did that in a very public way. And what we ended up doing was a public poll, some public research, surveys, meetings, etc. And Dr. Flynn and Rebecca, who was working for him, they kind of undertook the study. And we knew it was going to be a bad result. We knew it was actually going to be a terrible result in advance, but it was just a way of starting to reboot the reputation, because a lot of the literature would suggest that the first step forward in a crisis is to admit any wrongdoing, or admit the kind of situation that you're in and be really realistic about it. So we openly announced the results to the public, and probably the key bit of data was the polling found that overall the institution had a reputation score of negative 18%. So that means, just to give you an example, so Dr. Flynn had done some research with Maple Leaf and also Toyota during those crises. Those reputations I don't think ever dipped below plus 50%. So not that I'm proud of this in any way, but it was the worst institutional reputation on record as far as this kind of research goes. But in doing that, what we were saying to our media colleagues, to our mayors, to the other very concerned citizens was, we're starting at zero, we're going to rebuild, we admit that we need to take a different tack moving forward and reboot the reputation. So, and I'd actually, on a lot of the measures, I think we've been successful. So in a year, we've done the polling again recently, we moved the needle about 8.5%. So we've had nearly a 10% improvement in 1 year of just concerted effort to engage the community in different ways. And I mean, this is a little bit more the propaganda function of PR, but part of what we found there was that there'd been no real concerted effort to get any positive media, and the media relationships were broken. So a lot of Dr. Flynn's recommendations to me and to our team was around how do you reboot those relationships, and we've done that very successfully. I think the media in Niagara, who were, I think, previously kind of resented by the administration and board of the hospital, what I found was they were pretty reasonable, but we just needed to engage them in a different way and treat them respectfully as colleagues who are important to us achieving our mission, as opposed to this external accountability mechanism that sometimes irritates you. Not to say that we don't all get irritated with each other now and again, but essentially that's where we're at now. For myself, what I got out of the interaction with McMaster and with Terry is we've been able to develop a whole swath of tools that I don't think most institutions have. So I have a reputation scorecard that I present quarterly to the executive team and the board, and it includes our metrics. So we have, you know, empirical data on our media metrics, and we do that bit in-house. We continue to monitor the polling. We're just doing that annually now because hospitals don't have big budgets for polling. I have some qualitative input, so I go around to those 60 or 70 stakeholders in the community, and I ask 7 of them randomly per month to give me 1 sentence about how we're doing, and those 7 sentences end up on the scorecard. And then lastly, I also oversee the patient relations function, so we have 2 people doing patient complaints, and we track that data and represent it there. And then we cross-reference it as an institution with our patient satisfaction data, our employee engagement data, our financial data, so it gives a much broader picture. But I think that what I think it's done, and I think we'll see the industry move in this way, is to give hospitals another area that they need to be concerned about. Because I actually think a hospital could do very well in quality and patient safety, finances, employee engagement, have great governance, at least on paper, and then still end up what I would call the same kind of reputation deficit that Niagara Health System was in. So I think that maybe reputation is the 4th or 5th quadrant on a really balanced scorecard, or in a really fulsome sort of strategic plan. It's something that we can look at, but where I'm advantaged is now I can go to these other executives who are used to seeing data on all those other quadrants and present them with something on a single page, and we can do drill down. Like, they usually get quite a big package from me of the drill down, but a single page will really let us know, at least in some way, how we're doing. So that's probably in wrap up. I'm sorry Terry's not here. I think he would have a great deal to add that would be far more erudite than what I'm speaking about, but and I guess I'll turn it over to the next group in the panel. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Brady. Yeah, the format was going to be that there'd be questions at the end of the entire session, and I think we might as well stick with that. We also started early, so there should be plenty of time for questions at the end. So, and for those who deal with student ratings of your performance as a professor, just think, at least you're not the Niagara Health. So, the next panelists are Catherine Graham, who is an associate professor in the Department of Theatre and Film Studies, and who has consulted widely on building artistic capacity in activist performance nationally and globally. And her community partner is Maureen Martineau, who is an independent theater artist and the former co-artistic director of the Theatre Pomino. By the way, these biographies are in the programs that you've received. While she was co-artistic director, she participated in the creation of over 150 productions performed across Canada and Europe. She has worked with the One Drop Foundation as an artistic advisor on international development projects, on the theme of water in Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and India. She's also a novelist. She has written one mystery novel, and the second one is due to appear in the autumn. So, Catherine.
I think I'm actually going to let Maureen start to talk about the work we've done together.
Okay. So, okay. So, hello everyone. First, thank you for inviting me here. And excuse for be patient with my English because it's a second language for me. So might some words not be the good ones, but Catherine will correct me. So that's why she's just beside. Yeah. Okay. So well, as you heard, I've been working for Théâtre Parmi Nous since 30 years, last years, and I just now I'm doing some more writing right now. But what was very interesting for us is that we're in a field of intervention theater, social art. And in Quebec, since 1980, this type of work has really dropped down because of all these, all the social movement was a bit lower. But then there was a rise again in the years 2000. So we network. Our group networked a lot with European movement, and in that network we met a lot of Catherine Graham's work, even if we've been knowing each other for 30 years now, because
We were preschoolers when we met.
Yeah. So what was very interesting is at a certain point we even did a theater project together, and I think it's that project that we'll talk a little bit about, and also the collaboration we had with Catherine Graham in the One Draw project. We'll use those two projects to maybe to enlighten how it was very useful for us to have an academic person to follow up our work and to bring new notions to it. So the play I'm talking about was Revenez Lundi, which was a project that was involving Théâtre Parmi Nous from Quebec, Théâtre du Campus from Belgium, and officially also the University of McMaster, Hamilton. So it was really the three partners, and this was supported by artistic funding by International Commission of Theatre. So what happened is that our starting point for this play, the only thing we had when we started was a very short script, one scene, involving a social worker, and also her client, one of her clients. So it was two women, one of her clients who was on social assistance. And this little scene was about this social worker explaining to her client how to make a budget to fit in all their needs. And we also had the formal idea for the play was the office that was the office of the social worker and the waiting room for the client, with a door in between these two places. And we asked ourselves, will this door open at one time in this 1 hour play? And it was in real time, this play. I mean, it lasted 1 hour, and the play was about this noon hour, where this social worker was having lunch in her office because she was really stressed, a lot of work. So usually, if we did not work with someone from the university, we would have done this play by approaching these two characters in a more conventional way, like we would have created this character of what we heard of their realities, respective realities, and with their psychological background, and so we would have made a play reflecting reality and bringing people to have a social debate around that, citizen debate. No, so, okay. But when we had invited Catherine Graham 4 years before that, not 4 years, a couple of years before that, in a big meeting about social art in Victoriaville, and she had given this conference about the habitus, which was a new notion for us, because, you know, when you're in the action of directing a theater group, you don't have, you know, you're not doing a lot of research or innovation, you're just doing the job, doing a lot of production. But this moment, this festival, was an opportunity to hear different panelists, and me and the other girl from the other campus were really concerned, you know, curious. What is this habitus thing about characters? And so that's why we made this project, not knowing what it was. We say, Catherine, come, and we're going to do this new play, and we'll try to work with this notion of habitus that maybe you can explain at this point.
Yes, the short version of Pierre Bourdieu. So I had been invited to give a talk about what made interventionist theater work. And through my own research, I knew about the work of Pierre Bourdieu on the idea of habitus, which some of you may be familiar with, but particularly, I think what was important about it for this project was the idea that power relations in society are often not justified by verbal means, but that they get played out almost unconsciously by interactions of bodies, which obviously can be pretty critical for thinking about why theater is doing something that making speeches isn't. And so I used that notion to look at what a number of different interventionist theater companies were doing to try to look at their work, including the Parminou and some work I'd seen from the campus. So I think what I really did at the conference was to say, here's what I see you doing, here's a way to think about it, that maybe you're not thinking about it. And it led to, on that project, a whole new rehearsal and creation process that was based much more on starting from body. Let's forget the dialogue, let's forget the thematics, and let's just see what two women do on two sides of a door. What is the dynamic that happens here? Some of you heard me say before, I particularly remember a moment in the creation when we were talking about the idea that the social worker was completely stressed out, because we were trying to deal with both sides of this problem, that social workers, you know, sort of the idea that we live in a world where there's two kinds of people, the overworked and the unemployed, right? And there was a moment when we were working on it where one of the directors suggested to Maureen that she be sitting on the back of a chair, literally ready to jump out the window of her office because she couldn't take it anymore. And Batu, the other actress writer who was working on it, was pounding on the office door with her fist. Maureen could not go to that door, right? She was just incapable of not going to the door. And that led to a whole kind of reflection about what are the things we do that we don't intend to do, that don't make sense, that don't help the situation, but there's something in us that makes us feel we have to make this move. We will feel shameful or we'll feel in some way that something is desperately wrong if we don't make this move. So I think that was a place where more sort of academic research allowed to appreciate, I think partly just to appreciate what was happening in a rehearsal process.
But it also brought us to a new regard, a new vision of social characters. Because, you know, when you've been doing that for years and years, you have this very, you know, very narrow, at the end, idea about power characters and, you know, left people, excluded people. So this notion of habitus was really good to explore in that play, and I saw where it made a difference. Like, so we could realize that the client and social assistants for us was usually a person, when we tried to define this character, it was a person who would always ask for services and, you know, more and more. So, but questioning, identifying that was the habitus, would say, okay, what if we move that? What if we change that? So that gave the starting point of the play. During this noon hour break, she goes to her agent and knocks at the door, but not for asking something. She wants to give something. So she was bringing flowers to her. So that was breaking the rule. And at the same time, we broke the rule also of the social worker, because there's this rule, social rule, normal attitude, which is, if I'm working in this government welfare place, well, I will never talk about my personal life with my clients. But because this is, you cannot do this, it's not professional. But we tried it in the theater, and that opened. She was, you know, at a certain point, they had the same mother problems with their children, and, you know, they had the same, you know, stress about economics too, because she was a single mother, that worker. So that opened a path to see the relation. Everything was everything was making them in separate worlds, but breaking this habitus thing through theater, what helped us found what was making a link between those two persons, and what was the solidarity that you could build. So that was very interesting. We never had approached characters like that. So I think it was very useful for this project to have this, to benefit from that research that Catherine had done.
Do you want to talk about One Drop?
Yeah. You want to talk about
Okay.
One Drop? Okay.
So the other place we work together that some of you know about is the One Drop Foundation, which is a foundation founded by Guy Laliberté, the founder of the Cirque du Soleil, whose goal is to alleviate poverty throughout the world by creating access to water. But a really important part of their work is they work on what they call a tripod method. So they work with microfinance, with technical support for creating access to clean water, creating irrigation in Honduras in particular. I think they were working on that. And also they work with what they call social arts. So to try and get community buy-in by artistic workshops and by plays that travel around the affected regions. So I've been involved with that partly through my work with the Parmi Nous. There's the Parmi Nous, among other companies that I work with who recommended my work to One Drop. In a position that we did want to talk about a little, so there are international meetings every 2 years of all the artistic and technical partners working on the One Drop projects. And at these meetings, I was first invited to be what they call a libre penseur, which literally would translate as a free thinker. One of our colleagues from Burkina Faso was very worried that I belonged to a Protestant religious sect. When that name came up, I simply responded that if that meant I was allergic to dogma, probably it was a fine title. Apparently the Cirque du Soleil uses this position. It was a really interesting position for an academic to be in, because the idea was not that I would present a paper as I had done at the International Theater Meetings Conferences initially. It's just that I'm there in the room as the work is being discussed, and I'm asked from time to time to intervene about what I'm hearing. So, I mean, as academics, I think what we call probably a lot of what I end up doing, and I have to tell you, when they first asked me to do this, I thought, I'm not sure I know how to do this. But I realized really quickly that it's actually what we do in classrooms all the time. Just listening to what you're saying and trying to hear what is the undercurrent here. I think in many ways what we as academics would call what happens there is discourse analysis often. But discourse analysis on the fly, it's a bit of a challenge. Things are happening in translation a lot of the time. We're working in 3 languages, in Spanish, French, and English. Believe me, that makes discourse analysis a little more challenging. But we were talking last night about one of the moments when this became really important around women's issues. There was a somewhat heated debate going on about the importance of respecting local culture versus the importance of trying to create changes in local village culture, particularly around the role of women. Because on the one hand, people were raising the issue that if we don't, so for instance, some of it was simply like if facilitators go into some of the small rural villages in Central America dressed in shorts and tank tops, they won't be accepted by the villagers because women are not expected to dress in this way. But on the other hand, one of the other issues that was coming up was that in the workshops for youth that were being organized, it was very difficult to get the young women of the villages to participate regularly because they are responsible for much of the domestic labor in the home, and so they simply don't have time. They would be responsible for cleaning the home, for getting water, and so they don't have time to participate in the workshops about how we could make it easier to get water, for instance. The debate started to get quite heated at one point. And I think the intervention we talked about was the moment when it suddenly struck me that there were two words that were coming up. One was change and the other was respect. But the way we were talking about respect was necessarily in many ways referring to the past. It was referring to here are the past traditions and how are we carrying these into the present. The word change was really focusing on futurity, right? So that I think one of the things that happens in those situations is because of the kind of training we as academics have, not just to listen to what's being said, but to listen to what are the cultural or intellectual structures that are driving the way we're looking at this problem. It's sometimes, I think, possible, as it was in that circumstance, to intervene in a way that says, this is perhaps not the best way to be talking about this, or, you know, we're talking right past each other here because we're fundamentally talking about two different things. But there is a real problem in doing this work, that it is important to respect local traditions, but particularly around the issue of women's work, if respecting traditions means maintaining the gender differences that there are in the community, it may be impossible to solve the underlying problem that we're ultimately trying to solve. And sometimes I felt, as you've said before, the difficulty for the people working in the situation is, you know, it's a bit like that joke about when you're up to your ass in alligators. You're so busy doing the work that you don't necessarily have time to take that step back and say, okay, what are we assuming here that may or may not be true? I think we as academics, that's what we're trained to do. I do want to say, on the other hand, I think there's a huge benefit for academics like me in working with people like Maureen and working with the companies of One Drop. On the broadest level is that they have huge networks and huge experience of how things actually play out on the ground, which has been incredibly useful to me in even doing this theorizing. And secondly, on a really, really concrete level, we all teach undergraduate students, and I've learned things about how to run theater workshops that I could never have learned by reading books or even by attending training sessions, just by being constantly in touch. So I think we probably used our time. So do you want to finish up? Or?
No, it's okay. Oh, maybe just a last word to say, well, you said it a bit, but I just wanted to tell that in the network of theater, especially these groups that are, 30, 40 years old and have had, long, a very personalized artistic direction, we have a lot of questions now, but that we cannot answer. And it just appeared to me that the importance of possibly looking at, academic research to help the work. So we don't do it enough, and I think when we do it, what is nice is that often they just bring us to realize that one of our problem or difficulty was that we were not asking the good question to the problems we were having. So the way the question was brought, did not help us to find the answer. So we worked a lot when we do it. We work a lot on how to analyze the problem. What questions should we ask ourselves? And then it's easier. But it's not done enough because we don't have resources often to pay for academic research. One Drop could afford this, and that was fun because we could get answers from that for our own work.
Thank you, Maureen and Catherine. Next speaker is Mike Schutz, who in his day job is an assistant professor of music and the founding director of the Maple Lab, which he'll explain. And he also has an active career as a freelance percussionist. And he's going to talk about his research and his partnership with Elder Research Incorporated. Mike.
Thanks. Hello. Hello. Okay. I no longer work in audio engineering, but I had a background in that before, but that's not helping now. So my name is Mike Schutz. I direct the Maple Lab, which stands for Music, Acoustics, Perception, and Learning. And one of the questions I get a lot when engaging with the community is, what exactly is a music lab, and what do you guys really study there? And so what we're doing is looking at a number of issues related to how our brains process music and how we can use that information to inform music practice, music production, and inform the experience of listening for everyday people who happen to enjoy music. One of the great things about studying music is that we're studying something that the entire population is very interested in. And when I talk to people at parties, if you're trying to make small talk, you might ask, have you seen any good books, or have you seen any movies recently? No one ever asks, have you listened to music recently? Because it's something that's so pervasive and so baked into the fabric of what we do on an everyday basis that it's something everyone is very interested in. And so I think it's a neat thing to study, in part because we can learn a lot about how the mind works by looking at how we process music. We can also learn a lot about how to make music better by studying it. So that's some of the background on what we're doing in the lab. In particular, one of the things that I'm very interested in is how musicians use body movement, the visual information, to actually change the way music sounds. And so this comes in part from my background as a percussionist and sort of seeing some of these interesting things people are doing visually as they run around on stage. And actually I had a whole long debate with my graduate school percussion instructor about whether the body movements that we use when playing an instrument can actually change the way music sounds. And at the time, I was very much of the mindset that it couldn't have anything to do with music because it's not a fundamentally auditory thing. And so the neat thing about music cognition is we don't just have to wonder about these questions. We can actually run an experiment and figure out the answer. And so some of the work that we do is based on that now. And I have some videos to show you briefly the background of the research, but more importantly, what it is that our partnership with Elder Research is bringing to the table. Because working with them, we're able to develop some really interesting, innovative tools that allow us to research questions in ways that haven't really been done previously. So I'm going to go over to the laptop and try to start that up. And I was going to take the wireless mic with me, but I guess I'll just come on back then. Okay, so I think I got the videos working. We had some trouble before. But just to start off, I was going to play this demonstration which shows where a lot of this research comes from. And the question we're looking at here is whether the motions we use when playing the marimba, which is this xylophone-like percussion instrument, can give an illusion to actually make notes sound longer or shorter based on the length of motion that's being used. So we recorded this internationally renowned percussionist just playing simple gestures using long and short movements. You can't hear the sound, but trust me, it makes a big one. And then we wanted to understand how the gestures can actually change the way the music sounds. And through a series of experiments, we found that even though the body movements don't change the sounds that are being produced by the instrument, they actually change the way our brains are processing them. And so this is sort of the background of how we got interested in this whole issue. And this brings us to the point where we have what I see as one of the big problems with trying to do this kind of research, which is that the software tools that we have to explore this field of audiovisual interactions, how visual information changes the way music sounds, they don't really allow us to do the kinds of studies that are very useful in understanding how music works. It's easy to code up an experiment that just flashes some light or plays a bit of a tone beat. But these sounds and images don't really capture the rich nature of the musical experience. And so in doing studies like this, we've actually been finding things that are different than what you would find if you're using more traditional approaches. So the problem we have now is how can we keep using some of these more interesting things while moving more into the realm of the controlled experimental research that happens in psychology labs. And so this is where the partnership with Elder comes into play, because what we're able to do is build some software that tracks the movements of the percussionist and allows us to synthesize them in interesting ways that retain some of the lifelike properties of it. So this also comes from my interest in trying to understand what's the best way that we can give our students the tools that they need to be successful in developing their research careers. Because I think programming is a very important skill for students to develop, and in fact, I actually have a degree in computer science, and I'm a big believer that this is something that we should be teaching our students. But at the same time, I don't think it's very reasonable to expect a graduate student, say in music or psychology, to be able to program up a complicated piece of software just to try to explore an idea that they're interested in. And so this is where I'm partnering with Elder, where they have a team of software engineers, and we work together to make some really interesting tools. And so what you're going to see here is just a trace of the movement of that mallet as the percussionist strikes the instrument. So that much we could actually do on our own, and in fact we worked out that part in the lab here. The interesting thing is how they're able to take this information and create something that I call a virtual marimbist. And so here what we have, I don't know how much you can see it in the back, but this is a 4-joint skeleton representation of the marimbus, and this is just a single dot which is tracking the head of that mallet. And so with this software, we've actually set it up so that the students in the lab can type in information into this Excel spreadsheet, and the software then synthesizes this smooth motion within the context of an experiment, so we can actually start to generate some of our own body movements to try and better understand how the brain is processing these. Oh dear. So we learned earlier that the first time on this computer it plays through in this green distorted thing, the second time it seems to play okay. So one of the interesting things about this is that it allows the students then to explore questions that I think would otherwise be beyond the scope of what we're able to look at if we're limiting ourselves to just the conventional software. So we'll try this again, take 2. So if you're in the back and it's sort of hard to see, what we have is essentially we extract the key joint information from this performer and then use that to build this fairly lifelike skeleton. And then we're able to synthesize all sorts of kinds of different movement, and that allows us to really explore the sort of cognitive underpinnings of what this musician is doing in order to control the kinds of sounds that we're hearing. And it allows us to look at some questions that I think would otherwise just be beyond the scope of what we're able to do with the more conventional software. And this is interesting because we get to do some novel things in the lab, and it also means that the students are getting a chance to sort of push out into a new area that we wouldn't otherwise be able to explore. Now what I showed you here is the first software package we built together, and we're now working on another system that allows us to look at how the movements we use when listening to music actually help us hear the music more accurately. And so we're finding that if you nod your head or tap your foot, or in our case tap on a drum pad while listening to music, it doesn't just seem like a fun thing to do, it actually helps you understand the temporal structure of the music better. And because we've worked together to design the software to synthesize all these things from the beginning with an idea to scaling it up for bigger experiments later on, the students in my lab are then able to take the software and use it to do a lot of interesting things. And in fact, I think we just finished experiment 16 with moving to the beat stuff, all based on sort of small extensions to the way the software was originally designed. And it works like this because here we're working with a team of very talented software engineers that really understand the full life cycle of a project. And they're also very interested in academic research. Generally, they're making a living doing contract work for businesses and corporations where they're building systems to help them with various things in terms of the product development and the financial end of things. And so here we have a chance, and I think one of the things they're interested in is to just explore things that are of intellectual and academic interest. And then by working with them, we're able to do this in a way that I certainly wouldn't be able to do if I were just programming this up myself. And so I think it gives us some really powerful tools in the lab. So we're actually, once we fully finish developing this, we're going to be posting some of the software online so that some of my colleagues in other labs can use this for some of their projects. And in fact, I have a colleague now at Western University who's taking some of this motion synthesis software and using it to generate some more lifelike stimuli than she was able to make before. And so I think that's really a neat thing, because then we can use these tools that we're developing to advance our understanding of the psychological underpinnings of how music works, and also how a lot of other things are being processed as well. So Elder apologizes they weren't able to be here today. They're actually based in Virginia, so it would have been quite a trip out for them, but they're very excited about this whole initiative and interested in continuing on with other partnerships.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And our next and last speaker is Matt Woolhouse. And Matt is an assistant professor of music cognition and music theory, who quite recently celebrated the formal opening of his digital music lab in association with Nokia, that will have access to the company's entire global music download data set. Unfortunately, Matt's industry colleague, Mike Bevel, missed his flight in New York and had, I believe, come from Europe and landed in New York. Always a mistake. And missed the flight, so he won't be here today, but Matt will give you a description of his work and his relationship with Nokia. Matt.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, I'd like to pass on Mike Bevel's apologies for not being here. I'd like to start just by thanking Bonnie and Melba Starwy for inviting me to the panel. And also just to say that I am not a businessman. And that might seem like an odd thing to start with, but in a way it's quite an important aspect of the relationship that one builds up with an industry partner, to realize that one has limitations in a certain area of activity that one can specialize in, and that that can be used to complement, not take over, not to dictate to the other partner, but you have complementary skills. And in fact, the most important thing to realize from my perspective is that good business, although I'm not a businessman, is about spotting mutual interest. And the mutual interest between myself and McMaster and Nokia is obviously what I want to talk about this morning. I want to go back a couple of years, 2.5 years actually, to 2010 to talk about the origins of this partnership. Because I'm also a believer that partnerships take time to develop, because they are, although there may be a contract, a formal contract which underpins the partnership, and there is in this case, it's a 5-year contract with Nokia, data sharing and cooperation agreement. They're also based on trust and sort of mutual understanding and intention and purpose for the project. And this started back in 2010. I was at a previous university. I was in the UK, University of Cambridge, as a research fellow there, and I got a phone call out of the blue from Nokia saying, would I be interested in analysing some of their music download data? It's a sort of one of those things that doesn't happen very often, and you jump at the chance to do something like that. They said, well, we're going to have about 1.8 million downloads from 13 different countries that we'll put on a few discs and we'll send them over to you. First of all, just very briefly explain, a music download is a piece of behavioral data, essentially, of a piece of music downloaded by a particular person in a particular country at a particular time. And if you work in the digital humanities, that's very interesting stuff, because you can begin to trace the trajectories of people's listening habits and the way that music spreads around the globe. So I saw this as a golden opportunity. The other thing about these data that Nokia were initially sending through is that they happened over the course of the Soccer World Cup in South Africa. So that gave me the opportunity to look at the possible influence of sporting events on music consumption. And they said, well, all you need to do is to analyze this data, and if you find any interesting stories, let us know. And you can do with it what you wish, but we'd also like you to, if it's okay with you, to do a few media interviews about what you find in our data. So there essentially is the mutual interest. The mutual interest is that they have something that I like and I'm very interested in. And they have mathematicians, they have physicists who work on their data for predictive analysis purposes. So whenever you buy anything from Amazon, of course, you get records, a sophisticated recommendation system, which recommends a lot of other books for you to buy and that sort of thing. So they have all the people that, inside their organization that does that sort of thing, but they don't have music psychologists to unpick the human stories which lie inside their data. So that's what I could bring to the table. So that was effectively the mutual interest that they had realized they needed this partnership. And so I was approached, and we did, the initial project in 2010 lasted about 6 months, and I did my media interviews and found what I felt were interesting stories to do with musical adventurousness, the relationship between a country's music downloading, and personality, whether there is such a thing as a national character that can be deduced from the interest that it has in music, because there are studies linking musical preferences to personality. So that was a little bit of a sort of fun aspect of the research. And we shook hands at the end of the partnership and said, well, this is quite interesting. Maybe we should take this further. And then I'm a firm believer in providence, and something happened which triggered the current partnership. And first of all, a friend sent me a job application, or an email advertising a job for a position in music cognition and music theory at McMaster University. Now, jobs in music cognition and music theory don't come up very often. So people like me, we tend to work in a silo, and we don't get out very much. So it was 2 days before the deadline of the job, and I thought, well, okay, I'll send off my CV. And lo and behold, I was called for an interview, and this was in 2011. And I came along and saw the McMaster Institute for Music and the Mind, met people like John Connolly and Mike Schutz, my colleague at the School of the Arts, and had a thoroughly enjoyable 2 days. It didn't actually feel like a job interview, it felt more like attending a conference, which I thought was a very good sign. While I was at Mac at the end of March 2011, I picked up a copy of the Silhouette, and I saw that Stephen Elop had just visited campus. Now, Stephen Elop, for those who don't know, is the current CEO of Nokia and an ex-graduate student of McMaster. He's the first non-Finn to be the CEO of Nokia. And I was intrigued to see this, that he'd been to the Mac campus and to talk to, he's from engineering, to the engineering students about Nokia and what Nokia was wanting to do. And I did discuss this with John Connolly and with Mike at the time, about my previous partnership with Nokia, and John particularly encouraged me to explore this further. So I duly went back to the UK and contacted Nokia again and said, well, look, I haven't been offered a job yet, but there is this possibility of taking this project further in a very interesting and fortuitous place at Mac. And when I was offered the job at Mac as an assistant professor, Nokia were very interested at the possibility of taking this partnership to another level. And another level is from turning those 1.8 million downloads into hundreds of millions of downloads. So this is a truly vast data set that Nokia have given us exclusive access to. It has meant that I was able to apply for SHIRK funding, which I did and duly received, to help fund the initial research in the lab. And that has enabled me to employ, for example, a couple of research assistants over the summer who will be working on the data. I have another one, a very bright student who's just been awarded a USRA, and they will be working on the data. We have 6 conferences coming up, 3 of which are at Congress 2013 in British Columbia at the University of Victoria in various societies conferences. The areas that we will initially be exploring are things like music and migration. When people move abroad, they tend to take the music of their youth with them. They remain loyal to it because music is partly about our identities. And we also have an emotional attachment to the music that we listen to. It says something about who we are. And you can trace the musical fingerprint, if you like, of people as they move across the globe from their mother country, if you like, to the host country. So that's one of the areas that we'll be looking at. The other is music and the trajectories of fame. That's the way artists and songs rise in popularity, plateau, and then eventually die. And the interesting thing about the agreement is that the data set that we have access to is backdated to 2007, and it's a 5-year deal. So by the end of the project, which I hope will continue beyond 2017, we will have 10 years of longitudinal data to be able to look at. The other reason, I would just say something about Nokia, the other reason why this data set is particularly interesting is because when you, if and when you buy a Nokia phone, one of the things that they're interested in, I'm not exactly sure, unfortunately Mike Bevel would be able to speak to this far more eloquently than I can. I'm not sure what the business model is for Nokia Music. They have music stores, online music stores all over the world. But when you buy a Nokia phone, you can you take it out of the box and you put in your PIN, and you can have access to as much music and you can download as much music as you like. It's basically free with the phone. And what's interesting about that is it means that you're not constrained by price. So people are free to choose and to roam throughout the music store in their particular region, wherever they live in the world. Which means that you get a very interesting cross-section. The other thing about Nokia Music is that they're very keen on discovery, on allowing people to have a good experience by discovering new music. So they're not interested in just pumping Lady Gaga, U2, whoever, which super band or superstar it might actually be. So you get a very broad cross-section of artists which are represented within the catalogue, which runs to about 20 million songs. So I just want to mention a couple of other things about the lab before I wrap up. Am I doing okay for time? The SHIRK grant, Insight Development Grant, which is supporting the current research within the lab, has enabled international collaborations to take place. We have this summer 2 colleagues, ex-colleagues from the United Kingdom coming, one is a specialist in music information retrieval. That's people who are involved in the technical analysis of audio files, to come and work in the lab. The other one is a data mining expert, because obviously people with experienced knowledge of, advanced knowledge of databases is crucially important to fully exploit the rich research potential of this data set. And we also have someone from McMaster as well as a collaborator within the lab. And that's a chap called John McLaughlin, who is in Data Geographic Information Systems, because these are global data. And one of the ways in which we can disseminate and mobilize the knowledge from the lab is to display it from a pictorial perspective. And the globe and mapping the data onto the globe is a crucial aspect of the project. So we will be doing that over the coming months and over the next 12 months. So we're very excited about finally getting going with the lab on the project, supported by Schutz. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We have about 30 minutes for discussion, questions, points of clarification, anything like that. I won't start that. I'm sure there will be plenty of questions, but one thing I would just like to say in appreciation of something Matt said is that when you enter this business, one of the things that is one of the first things that crosses one's mind is, I'm not a businessman. I don't know the first thing about this. And one of the first things that also comes up in the discussion is that the business people you're dealing with ask if you want to run this business yourself. And when you say absolutely not, there is a palpable sense of relief from the other side of the table. Because typically, there are some notable exceptions, but typically people like me, I won't describe the rest of you this way, but when we try to run a business, based on our research, it demonstrates quite clearly how it's very good we got PhDs and did the research. It's also very good that we never entered business as a career, and we really shouldn't be doing it now. So there are some practical issues here about business plans and that sort of thing. 2 words that I can spell, and that's about it. So you need to form collaborations even once you get a collaboration such as you've heard about here. If it's going to be some sort of product, you really do need people to help you out with the basics. And sometimes that can be a challenge. And I will say one thing, I didn't go through Mike Bevel's CV, but it's in your brochure. But you'll see that he is a very heavy hitter within this business, and yet still has a very clear interest in research of it, because basically many industries understand that research is money, and it's a case of trying to marry these 2 sides up. So I will just sit quietly, and or maybe I'll field questions. I'll just point at people if they do have questions. So any questions, comments?
Shall I just speak up?
Oh, yes. Don't rely on my myopia.
Thanks, everyone. I would like to ask you a question about collaboration. I'd like to ask a question about collaboration. I'm interested in theories of collaboration and research. And something that came up in the presentation from Maureen and Catherine was regarding the complications around cultural difference. And you spoke to a kind of incommensurability in a way of collaborating across cultural difference. And I'm just wondering if that's something that arises in the other research practices for the other panelists, or just broadly how it is that you're thinking about the nature of collaboration, what is entailed, what does it do, where do the kind of crunch moments arise, the kinds of problems, the kinds of ethical complications that can be a part of collaborative research, the practices of collaboration. So I'm just kind of wondering about your ideas on those terms.
Are you addressing this more to other people on the panel?
It could be to anybody.
Okay, so I guess this might be a question partly for me, I'm sure for other people too. So yeah, there are ethical issues. Nokia are a for-profit organisation. Mac, as far as I can tell so far, is not. Certainly not in the humanities, anyway. So how do I sleep at night? So it's a very good question. My currency as an academic, the only currency I really have, to be honest, is integrity. Without it, forget it. You haven't got any credibility whatsoever. And so it's very important that whatever I do has integrity, or as much as integrity as I can possibly give it. And I wouldn't enter into an agreement where I had an industry partner breathing down my neck, telling me what to do. It's very important in a partnership for the partners to respect each other's spaces. And the deal with Nokia is basically that I have complete carte blanche over the data set. There are sensitive market areas within it, but they are essentially, they address market issues. I'm not interested in market issues. I'm interested in sociological and musicological issues of the data. So there isn't a conflict there. One may arise, in which case I'll have to negotiate it with my partners. But at the moment, there's very clearly defined areas of interest that I have.
I guess we wouldn't say we don't have any real conflicts of interest. I'm working with some software engineers, but one thing I found is they're really good at programming and they like just playing around with things. And so there have been several times where they found a new tool, like once it was the Nintendo Wii remote that gives you all sorts of fun things to do, where they just wanted to start building all these things for these experiments that I guess we could do that weren't really going to help us address anything that the students really needed to be working on to be building their careers. So we have a dialogue about funneling some of this enthusiasm into the proper channels to help with the research. That's one thing that's come up, but I haven't really had a lot of issues on any other front. I think probably because for them this is not a financial undertaking. This is something they're doing because it's of interest. And then from my end, I'm just very grateful that they're helping with this because they're very, very good at the software development, and I've done enough of that when I worked briefly in some periods in industry and in terms of my degree training that I can recognize the quality of what they do. So I'm hoping we can continue on with that for some time.
So Terry and I were both white Irish guys, so we didn't have a lot of cultural conflict, although my ancestors were Protestant, his were Catholic, but that didn't really come up in the study. When it comes to clashing, conflict, those kinds of things, I think the best thing folks can do, and we did this very rigorously, Terry and I, is to really have a process at the beginning when you really embark on the formal part of the collaboration to just have mechanisms for things like dispute. So I think that in terms of defining each other's roles as clearly as possible at the outset and who will do what and what are our time frames, etc., I think that's probably the easiest way to avoid the kind of conflict that can come up where I might be in a business realm operating with very tight parameters and the person I'm working with may be an institutional or researcher in the university who may not understand my field. And I think there's some of that, there's value in that as well. Talking frankly about, here are some nuances of the way people operate in my field, and here are some nuances of the way I operate as a researcher. I think the more of that happens, the better. Although I think a lot of that happens naturally. I mean, if you're ready to get into bed with someone, so to speak, to do a collaboration, you probably know each other very well and have some level of comfort. But I do think that, some formality is going to help you along.
In the art field, what is an issue is the intellectual property. If you collaborate to create a play and you involve research and even you involve many theater groups, what type of agreement do you have for after? What comes out of the work belongs to who? And at Théâtre Parmi Nous, we encountered that question a couple of times, and even with Revenez Lundi, because there was two different companies from two different countries. There was Catherine also who collaborated in the ideas, so in the writing of the play. And we also had this other project which was even more collective. It was a play that we did with 2 French groups and Belgian groups also. So for these 2 experiences that were involving many groups, we decided to create, I don't know if I'll have the word good, un logiciel libre.
Open source software.
Yeah, so it was collective property for the groups involved. So we could at any time, you know, rob a character, a scene, use it, transform it. So for these 2 particular projects, we created this type of agreement. So that's why today our play, L'Op bien lundi, is still touring. The play we did, that one is still touring in Belgium, I mean, for 100 times. But we don't get les droits d'auteur. You know, authors' rights.
There's no royalties.
No royalties, because that was the agreement. And I think it's interesting because it's very hard, you know, to define what did you bring in. Like I think Catherine brought some ideas and it really influenced some scenes. But I mean, so who's the author of the play? We signed the 3 names of the 3 authors, me, Patricia Mako, Catherine Ram. But then how do we, you know, if the play's still touring or somewhere. So that's a way to avoid conflicts. And it's another, but it's it's a very marginal thing to do, because usually this thing about royalties is a very strict thing that artists, you know, want to stick to. So, but in these experiences, it was different. And just the other thing also in One Drop, what I think is a great conflict of culture is when it's because for the project of One Drops and where we are involved also, it's when the money comes from one side. You know, you have collaborators from different countries, but it is supported only by the money that comes from one group of collaborators. So even if you want to make it an equal collaboration, I mean, there's always this stress about who's paying and what right does that give to the group who's paying. So that's a big challenge.
I'd just like to follow up on that and say, you know, I really have realized through the work with these theater companies and with the companies with One Drop, what one of our privileges is as academics, but I think it's actually really, really critical, and that frankly is tenure. Because I am not in the relationship to One Drop that some of the artists who are working with them are, in the sense that, you know, to put it really crudely, and I have said this to their international development director, ultimately I don't need their money. Right? I mean, obviously I want to work with them. Their financing can be important to me, but my livelihood is not at stake if I say something that displeases the group that's providing most of the funding. And I was in the same situation with the Pamino and the campus when we worked on a play together. And I really think we need to not underestimate this, and we need to look in the kind of work we've been doing, particularly the responsibility that that brings too. Because there have been situations when I was, you know, doing the libre penseur thing with One Drop, where I feel like, look, I know this undercurrent is happening here, and I'm the person sitting around this table who can afford to say it out loud, and I need to do that. So, you know, I think it puts me in, sometimes I feel, a slightly difficult ethical position, but on the other hand, you know, I'm not worried that I won't be able to pay actors next year if this collaboration breaks down. You know, obviously I want research projects to continue, and I need the funding in that way, but I think it is important to think through the relative vulnerability of different partners in these collaborations.
Other questions? Yes, Virginia.
It's really a practical question. It seems you all talked about serendipity. Serendipity for bringing the collaborations together. So how do you institutionalize serendipity? Can you think one moment, or one connection, or one thing that made the network possible? There's a whole variety of made the collaboration possible? And is that something we institutionalize? I'm doing your work on it.
For me, maybe I'll start this. It's just that willingness to reach out and look for some kind of interaction with someone that you know you can gain something with. Like, I mean, for me personally, I was sort of on a weird track in my healthcare career and started in this whole kind of PR vein by kind of, as you said, serendipitously auditing one of Terry's courses at the business school. And that really kick-started this kind of next phase of my career. But I think it was that internal willingness to say, okay, I'm going to be really anxious showing up at this class, or making that phone call, or reaching out to the executive at another company, or those kinds of things. But I think the more you condition yourself to swallow that anxiety and just get on with it and try to reach out for those folks, I think these things come about. It certainly has served me well.
Are we about to respond to this?
Sure.
About the question of serendipity, I would like to share my experience. My name is Ann OBrien. I teach art history. And I was also director of Confucius Institute until it's being closed. What I want to say is that as academics, we're very concerned about our time allocation. At least I am. And so, as a professor of art history, I would not necessarily go out to the community to reach groups that do not necessarily interface directly with art history. On the other hand, while I was director of Confucius Institute, I had a mandate to reach out to the community, and therefore I attended Hamilton Economic Summit for looking up partnerships and so forth. But inadvertently, I was able to benefit my students in art history because I met the owner of Historia, who was renovating downtown Tribal Hall. And while I didn't do direct interlinking for the CI on that occasion, because of attending the Hamilton Economic Summit, I was able to do something for art history. So what I guess I feel is we have to go outside our comfort zone, and then it's a question of time. If I'm teaching art history full-time, I have to publish, I have to teach. What percentage time should I be devoting to community engagement? And if we don't do that, we're not going to attain those serendipitous occasions for collaboration. Thanks.
Well,
I take very seriously what Angela says about time, because I think for all of us, there's serendipity in the moment, but there's also maintaining relationships over a long period of time that mean that you're in contact with the people with whom the serendipity can happen in some way. And I think it is an issue within academic life that maintaining networks of relationships takes time. You have to put time into it. And I will say the other thing that I've sometimes found, which is probably partly particular to working with performance work or events, is that you have to sometimes put in the time when that time is needed by the partner. Not, if I'm looking at theater events, it's unlike when I'm researching in a library. Generally speaking, the library is still going to be there 2 years from now, and it's open at regular hours. If I'm looking at events, I have to be there when the event happens, which sometimes doesn't work very well with our academic, schedules. So I think in terms of institutionalization, to come back to Virginia's question, I think we have to be finding ways to recognize the need for simply time for this ongoing work of maintaining relationships with broad ranges of people. I think one of the things I find myself thinking about is probably, especially since I started doing the one-drop work, I'm now in touch with dozens of theater companies, some of whom work mainly in Spanish, a language in which I am not even within shouting range of fluent. And just thinking about how large a network can I maintain. what can we do institutionally to help people maintain these networks? I'd also, and here I'm probably partly speaking to Shirk, things like, the research time stipend that we used to be able to get as Shirk grants, I mean, can be absolutely crucial to some of this work. There is no substitute for time. We cannot get around that. And I think institutionally within the university, we haven't solved that problem yet. We've got a lot more work to do.
Yeah, I think efficient use of time is something that's very important. It's one of the things that actually drives my partnership, because in terms of developing these software tools, some of them I might be able to create if I, spent 2 years on it and didn't do anything else. And so by working with them, I'm basically able to leverage a lot of time, so that I invest a certain amount of time in the planning for what we do, and we get back much more. And so as Virginia was asking that question, I'm just reminded of a quote, and I think it was Louis Pasteur who said that chance favors only the mind that is prepared. And so I think probably the best way to create all these serendipitous moments is to just be ready for all these serendipitous moments. And I know that looking back at my history, I've sort of dabbled in one sort of area for a while, then another, and something else. And so mostly at the time, just because I was interested in various things, and then periodically these all come together. For instance, when we have a whole Institute of Music in the Mind, and we have music and psychology and engineers and all those things. But yeah, it always, I think, in the end does come back to time, like Catherine was saying.
Could I just jump in, and maybe another question, but to pick up on that, and Virginia's question, I think is really important. And I think one of the things, and you, Mike, just mentioned the interdisciplinarity that characterizes the university. We proudly talk about it as regards humanities. I think these meetings, as we're having today, are very good. There'll be a separate one for the Faculty of Social Sciences. There'll be a separate one for the business school. We have various recruiting activities where the humanities are kept separate from the social sciences, that are kept separate from the sciences. And many of us interact with those groups. We would attempt to recruit the same sorts of students. I don't know if that's viewed as a threat elsewhere on campus, but I work with people from science, engineering, those two in particular, and health sciences. So it would be nice if at least I and some of my colleagues could show up at those recruitment exercises as well. It's just a few of us. We won't take too many of the students. But I think this institutional silo effect, I think, is something that really has to be addressed. And I think the new budget model, not to get off onto that, but I think that's another issue where it's going to really force us to address the issue of having a business day for humanities and a business day for business and for science. This is all meant to be working together. So, other questions? Comments? Yes?
So can panelists hear me? Yeah, okay. So I do work in corpus linguistics, so work on large data sets. One of the problems you run into a lot in corpus linguistics is data sharing and exclusivity. So you said get a data, you get a data set, you tend to not be able to share it, and this in turn hinders referenceability. So I was wondering, are there any comments on how you could deal with sort of exclusivity in partnerships and data sharing and referenceability?
I suppose that's a question which may certainly relate to me. Okay, so Nokia are not opening their data vaults for anyone to go and look into them. They're giving exclusive access to the lab. Basically, the deal is what Nokia's position is this: these data are produced by the public, and they believe that they rightfully reside within the public domain, intelligently interpreted. And there's a big difference between just splurging your data out there for anyone to pick over and having the interesting human-centered stories taken from it and synthesized into some coherence. That's the basic way the dynamic works. The lab has this access to the data set. I am free to engage any collaborator that I think would bring value to the project. So there's no bar on me getting a mathematician, for example, getting an engineering student, getting a psychology student. I have quite a few of the students that work in the lab are from psychology, because they, like John was stating, I firmly believe in collaboration, and that knowledge is effectively fluid, and that if you build up these institutional walls, it creates artificial barriers for the flow of knowledge within the university. So I get as many students from outside of humanities as I possibly can, because some of them are incredibly bright and very well trained. We also have music students working in the lab who know a lot about music and are very, very passionate. And they interact with each other, and I just sit back and I watch the fireworks. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, in terms of the access to the data, it's not for anyone, but if I feel that someone can bring value, they can come to work in the lab and they can have full access to the data set.
I'm wondering if Brady might speak to this in another way, because I think the issue at some levels is sort of vulnerability and risk around this data. I mean, I think we run into a similar thing, that we're not working with data the way you are, that there's certain things that I am privy to that I am asked not to share publicly. And I feel like that's fair enough. When somebody, if there's a particular vulnerability here, if there's a particular risk, we have to take that into account. But I do think sometimes there would be other ways to control the risk. So I think what you're talking about, Matt, is that you control the risk of letting somebody else have access to this data by, there's some constrained way in which they're going to use it, the person, which is kind of different than just throwing all the data out there publicly and saying anybody can develop whatever conspiracy theory they would like on the basis of this data set. But this has got to come up with the kind of problem that you dealt with.
Yeah, it does to some degree. Like, I think it's a far different situation. Like, I think the Nokia data set would be very valuable to, say, a RIM, and I'm sure that's part of why they're pretty proprietary around releasing it. In our case, it was just a very sensitive topic. So in engaging Dr. Flynn, I knew that the outcome could be very bad to a degree that it could be very bad for me. So, I mean, depending on how his report was written, if it disparaged all of my superiors, including the board of trustees, the interim CEO, etc., that would be a difficult outcome for me. But at the same time, I had to have some faith and let Dr. Flynn do the study, or else it would look as though I'd commissioned the study. And we knew it's kind of hard to describe the situation, but I had to have a good enough relationship and trust with Dr. Flynn and know his work well enough to know that he wouldn't do anything unprofessional, but would also stay true to the data. So there was more a discussion on that. I know you need to stay true to the data. However, there are sensitivities in this environment that we should both be aware of. But again, it was very much an environment where we needed to be fully transparent as well. So I think I only got the report, and we said this publicly, I got the report the night before. The next day, Dr. Flynn presented it to the media in its entirety, all of the data. And likewise, we even, as soon as I got it, we posted the invoice for the work online so that no one could say there was anything hidden about the kind of work we were doing. So we really tried to maximize the transparency, and that in a way was the right thing to do, but also a good strategy when you're trying to rebuild public confidence. But yeah, it was a difficult kind of feeling for me, knowing that it was sort of airing our dirty laundry to a very significant degree. So I don't know if that's helpful or is that what you have in mind?
Yeah. I mean, it does strike me, this is a little different, as you said, when you're working for commercial purposes or you're working for public purposes. Because I think we've noticed, working with One Drop, when we were first working with them, we met a lot at the Cirque du Soleil's headquarters in Montreal. And there's a very commercial reason for limiting vulnerability, and you do not walk around those headquarters. You are escorted by a security guard, and that's because they're trying to protect their intellectual property about new acts they're developing. That their concern is a kind of industrial espionage, I guess. And people, and I remember the first time I was there, people telling me, this is nothing. You should have seen what it was like when they had the original Beatles tapes in the building, right? I mean, you couldn't go to the washroom without being escorted by security, right? So yeah, I think there's two slightly different situations there, as you say, whether you're trying to protect commercial property or whether you're trying to protect certain vulnerabilities in material that does need to be made public at some point. And maybe we need to negotiate those things differently. I think that's a place where we're maybe not so good at business, is knowing how to negotiate differently depending on the circumstance in which we're negotiating. How to write a contract that works.
I will say Milo, Milo, I will say it poorly, but I'll say it again. The McMaster Industry Liaison Office is somebody I go to immediately. If I hear the word business, I start coming down here. So we're just about on time, somewhat shockingly. So if you would join me to thank the panelists again.